Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the video. Another day, another whole bunch of RX 480 rumours have popped up. Mostly these are thanks to Chinese websites. Now, these rumours / leaks come to us in a whole bunch of flavours. We've got yet more 3D Mark scores, we've got temperature information, new reports on the number of ROPS, TMUs and other such components inside the system, whole bunch of images, and a partridge in a pear tree. Now, the reason that the 3D Mark scores I'm consistently pointing out to you is because it's very important to realise that they're all within margin of error of one another. So, for example, plus or minus 10%. The reason that's, of course, vital is because it shows that we've not been fed basically a whole bunch of crap when it comes to 3D Mark scores. They are pretty all consistent, and that shows that the previous leaks regarding performance are most likely fairly genuine. So, for example, we've seen the 5500 to say 5900 for Firestrike seems to be pretty consistent, and these results are the same. These new ones are 5500 most likely at stock, just over 5800, which most likely is overclocked. Unfortunately, is not exactly a massive amount of information there. And another set of results is putting the GPU score at just a shade under 5400. Once again, considering that we don't know driver revisions, considering we don't know a lot of the other system information, this goes well within the margin of error that you would expect from graphics driver results. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's quite interesting because the driver revisions which are being used obviously are reporting incorrect clock speeds, which tells me that the drivers are still not exactly the best for this card. So who knows, maybe on final revision hardware we could see an additional 5, 10, 15, what have you % added on top of this. And as I keep saying, 3D Mark performance is unfortunately not always represented exactly in gaming, especially AMD hardware. It doesn't do so well typically with 3D Mark stuff, but it does at least give us a point of comparison versus other Radeon hardware. So what about the temperature? Well, temperature obviously of the card was always going to be fairly low, and someone with a detector used their infrared thermometer, to measure what the card's putting out. Now, there are two figures we can presume. One is under load, one is at idle, 62 versus 37. As one can imagine, this temperature may fluctuate a little bit from what the actual core's putting out if you were to physically take a measurement of the core, but it does show that the GPU is not exactly running at 500 degrees or the surface of the sun type of temperatures. It's pretty much within the margin of error from what we've heard many times over. Yet more leaks regarding the performance of the card show that, as we all know, it's 14nm FinFET, which has 2304 stream processors, so far so regurgitating information. But certain models are going at just a shade under 1330 MHz, 1328 for their XFX version. That's compared to 1266 for the reference model. But the really interesting thing is that some websites are reporting that we've got 144 TMUs and 64 ROPS. 64 ROPS does make an awful lot of sense, but as one can imagine, until we get official confirmation, or better still, a whole bunch of GPU-Z screenshots which show it dead on, then do take that with a pinch of salt. As we all know, the memory interface is 256-bit bus, and we also have 256 GB per second of bandwidth, which, to be honest, is pretty damn excellent considering the various improvements to the Polaris efficiency. Truth be told, I'm actually really impressed that the cards haven't really made their way into full reviews yet, considering, I mean, there's been an awful lot of leaks, but this card is going to be, I wouldn't say it's going to be a revolution to GPUs, because that's always a bit of a strong statement, but I think in terms of the price, it's going to really upset the market, and it's going to be, assuming for example, that the higher end reports of this GPU, of it being almost 980 levels, GTX 980 levels of performance, are accurate, it's going to be really curious to see how Nvidia are going to respond and how the market is going to respond. Because I imagine there are going to be a lot of individuals, for example, if you've got G-Sync monitors, it doesn't really help you unless you're willing to re-shell out everything, in which case it doesn't make much sense. But if you're kind of new, or you don't have a G-Sync FreeSync monitor, and you're thinking to yourself, well, gee, what card do I get? If you're not invested in Nvidia's cards, like you don't need an Nvidia card, for example, with physics or whatever, and you just think to yourself, I just want the best performance versus price that I'm spending out, it's going to be really hard for people to convince themselves to spend that extra 100, 150, 200, depending obviously what the cards end up being in retail, for the GTX 1070. Because I imagine a lot of individuals are just going to say to themselves, well, gee, I'm just going to buy one card, maybe two cards in Crossfire, because you're going to theoretically just stomp the GTX 1070. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a price cut from Nvidia, or they release the GTX 1060 perhaps. The problem is with the 1060, it may cause Nvidia to eat into its own GTX 1070 sales, because it's going to be really curious how they're going to respond with that. As I've said previously, it's like if you release a 1060 that doesn't compete with the 480, then the 480 is the better card, unless it's cheaper, in which case it's going to be competing with the RX at 470. So basically what I'm saying is, although Nvidia own the high-end market with the 1080, AMD are going to own a lot of the market with the 460, 470 and 480, and therefore it's going to be quite a slugfest, I imagine, over the next 6 months or so, as both companies try and counter one another, trying to do a lot of deals. So for example, you may have Nvidia try and do a price cut, then AMD may respond or may release a slightly faster variant of the card, and who knows? I mean, we're reporting all of this news now on the RX 480, but there was some ambiguity from Lisa Su and other folks at AMD, whether it's the full lineup of Polaris or whether there would be more Polaris cards. And if there are more cards in the Polaris violin, if you will, does that mean we're going to see the RX 480X? Because some of the early reports were that there's going to be 40 compute units, or maybe they can't do that. Maybe we're just going to have to wait for Vega. Very curious time in the GPU industry, at least in my opinion, and great for PC gaming though. Let's face it, that's what's the important thing. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.